How do I hire employees? How do I fire employees?
Hello, and thank you for asking ADAL.
Hello.
You asked a good question. I'd be happy to help you with that.
Thank you for answering my question.
It's very important to understand that there are two different types of workers, either an employee or an independent contractor. An independent contractor would be treated as a 1099 worker. An employee would be considered a W-2 worker. W-2 meaning the designation of the tax form that they get at the end of the year to articulate the amount that they earn for that year.
Really?
The amount of control that an employer has over that worker, whether they are an employee or an independent contractor, is determined usually by their status, either as an employee or an independent contractor.
Got it.
Now, the Internal Revenue Service, or IRS, has very specific definitions, or at least general guidelines, as to what defines or distinguishes between an independent contractor or an employee. So let's go into that first before we talk about hiring and firing. Examples of independent contractors are individuals such as doctors, dentists, veterinarians, lawyers, accountants, contractors, subcontractors, public accountants, stenographers, auctioneers, anyone that's an independent trade or business or profession where they offer their services to the general public. Those are generally considered to be independent contractors. However, whether these people are independent contractors or employees depends many times on the facts of each case. Generally, however, an individual is an independent contractor if the payer or employer has the right to control or direct only the result of the work and not what will be done or how it will be done. The earnings of the person working as an independent contractor are also subject to self-employment tax.
That makes sense.
In contrast, an employee is typically somebody who is under the direct control of an employer. This is somebody who offers them a wage but then withholds taxes, withholds for a retirement plan, does withholdings, and from the IRS's point of view, they are considered a W-2 employee. The earnings of a person who's working as an employee are typically calculated, and taxes are calculated and withheld by the employer.
Oh.
One of the tests that the IRS uses to determine whether somebody is an employee or an independent contractor is determining the degree of control that an employer has. For example, did the employer provide you with a uniform? Did the employer provide you with a laptop, a cell phone, a vehicle to be able to do your work? Is the employer controlling your schedule? If the answer is yes to all these questions, then chances are you are an employee. Now, first, let's talk about how do I hire an independent contractor? Typically, you need to provide a W-9 form in order to get that person's either tax ID number or social security number. Many times you'll want a resume to verify that person's qualifications. It is important that when you make an offer to anyone, that creates an implied contract. In some cases, like in the state of Texas, a verbal contract is just as enforceable as a written contract, so you need to make sure you are cognizant of what you verbally offer someone, because in some states, that can be enforceable with sufficient evidence. Most often, it's best to have a written contract showing the details of the agreement between you and the independent contractor.
No kidding.
So how would you hire an employee? First, you need to provide a W-9 form so that you can obtain their EIN or employer identification number or a social security number. Second, you need to set up your records, usually through your HR department or individually, for withholding taxes. This includes federal income tax withholding, as well as federal wage and tax statements. You also need to make sure that you made provisions for withholding for state taxes. Many states have state withholding forms, and you'll want to go to the state filing office or the Secretary of State to find out what the forms are for your specific state. Next, you want to define or clearly articulate what the role is that you're hiring for. It is very important that you give your employee distinct instructions on how they perform their tasks, what your expectations are when you expect them there, things that describe the nature of the work that they're being hired for. What is a proper way to fire an employee? Well, the first thing a good employer should know is whether or not their company has an employee handbook. It's very important to know whether or not you have an employee handbook or policies and procedures, because what's worse than not having a policy and procedure handbook is having one but not following the guidelines in that handbook. Many employee handbooks or policy and procedure handbooks will contain things like a company philosophy, conditions of employment, company policies and procedures, compensation and benefits. The next thing you need to do is review their past performance reviews and feedback. If you don't have any performance reviews, you need to make sure as an employer that you've at least documented some of the performance reviews, or at least documented that you've given that individual feedback or had an opportunity to inform them of some type of work-related issue that is leading to termination. You also specifically need to document any kind of official warnings, any violations in company policy, anything that would substantiate your terminating that employee. Next, I recommend that if you terminate that person, you terminate that person face-to-face. You don't want to send a text. You want either you as the employer or the head of your HR department to terminate that employee in person. Also, as the employer, I don't recommend that you fire the employee by yourself. You need to make sure you at least have one other person in the room, and this is also a safety issue, is because there are some instances where the employee may become emotional or even violent.
Wow.
It is important to document that there is, usually through an exit interview, that there has been some type of face-to-face conversation with that employee. Try to make the exit interview short and simple, be clear and concise, and make sure that that employee understands that this termination is final. One of the worst things you can do is terminate in a half-baked manner and leave the employee unsure as to whether or not they were terminated. It can create significant consequences for the company or for fellow employees or for the intellectual property or other things that are important to the company. Next, you need to make sure you collect any work-related items. This includes security badges, keys, card keys, laptops, credit cards, cell phones, tablets, mobile devices, company car, any other kind of miscellaneous office equipment. Make sure that that individual is also escorted out of the building on civil terms. My name is Dr. Raymond King. I'm an attorney as well as a physician. I am a corporate lawyer in practice, and I form many corporate entities that hire and fire employees or independent contractors on a routine basis.
Thank you for helping me.
Thanks again for asking ADAL. I wish you the best.